The Five Nights at Freddy's fandom has produced some genuinely unhinged comics, and today I'm diving into the worst of them. At the end of each, they'll get a rating from slightly cursed all the way up to permanently rewired my brain. In April 2019, a Brazilian artist and writer working under the name Bonfim posted the first pages of a fan webcomic called Children Rekindled, but it wasn't her first attempt. Rekindled was a full reboot of an earlier comic Children, which Bonfim and a small team of collaborators had been posting on the Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit since 2016. That original run reached hundreds of pages and built a genuine following before pacing problems and stalled plot threads forced the team to shut it down and start over properly. For anyone who has never touched a Five Nights at Freddy's game and has no intention of starting, this comic is the story the games themselves never bothered to tell. In the game, 5 children were murdered at a haunted pizzeria, and their ghosts ended up trapped inside the restaurant's animatronics. In Children Rekindled, everything you're about to hear happened from the victim side of it. The comic opened with Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in the small town of Hurricane, Utah on June 26, 1986. Middle schooler Michael Gould was spending his birthday at the arcade with 4 friends, Daniel Chesser, Bianca Elvis, Francis Duncan, and Charlie Turner. They stayed almost until closing time because Daniel refused to leave until he beat Bianca's high score on one of the arcade machines. None of them noticed that a man in a spring Bonnie costume, who was secretly William Afton, was watching them closely. William had a security guard uniform under the costume, and he paid close attention to how much Michael knew about the franchise. Then, towards the end of their time at the arcades, he offered them a special behind-the-scenes tour of the place as a special treat for the birthday boy. Francis never liked animatronics, and something about being led into the back by an employee in a rabbit suit unsettled him enough to say it out loud, but Charlie and Michael convinced him. They told him it was a family restaurant and the employees were supposed to be nice to young guests. This particular reasoning was the entire mechanism the killer relied on. As he led them to the back where he could be alone with them, William dropped the performance. Notably, underneath the costume, he still wore his actual security uniform, and yet he was the danger to these guests. Daniel was the first one he went for. He forced him down and drove a blade into both of his eyes, one after the other, blinding him completely before he even finished screaming. Bianca tried to run, but William grabbed her and threw her into the exposed wiring of one of the animatronics' internal generators. This current ran straight through her, burning a track of scar tissue up the side of her neck. Francis put himself between the man and the others, and it cost him everything below his ribs. He was gutted with one long tear open straight across his stomach. Charlie was dragged into the kitchen screaming and shoved headfirst into a running pizza oven. Michael tried to hide inside one of the empty Freddy suits, but William found him and let the suit crush him. After the spring locks had done the worst of the damage, whatever's left of him was then finished off with the decapitation. And with that, the group of 5 were no more. Sometime after the murders, the friends woke as ghosts, but every injury that killed them stayed with them. They possessed the restaurant's animatronics, but at the same time, they were trapped in them. During the day, while the animatronics ran the routines for paying customers, the 5 were nothing but wandering spirits with no body to hold at all. Only at night, after closing, could they take control of the machines. Daniel possessed Freddy and remained blind forever. Bianca possessed Bonnie, carrying her burn scars and her permanently standing hair. Francis possessed Foxy with his stomach still open, and Charlie possessed Chica, carrying whatever the oven left behind. Worse still, the ghosts continued to feel the pain of their wounds years later, and the damage was not only physical, it affected their minds too. At one point, Bianca described the living as looking less like people to her now and more like indistinct shapes. This kind of detachment was dangerous, and that showed the mental distortion going on in the mind of the victims. The only piece of physical evidence of their murders came from a school newspaper photographer who noticed something dark smeared around the animatronics. He took a Polaroid of it and by accident caught the children's bodies hidden inside the suits. But instead of taking it to the police, the boy handed it to the restaurant's owners. The owners kept it and chose to protect the business over letting 5 sets of parents learn what actually happened to their children. The downside was that a Polaroid produced no negative film, so that print was the only copy that will ever exist. However, these 5 were not the first victims. 10 years earlier, in 1976, Sammy White, who was even younger than Michael and his friends, was stabbed outside an earlier Fazbear location, and the killer left his victim with the knife still inside him. And even as a ghost, he still carried that knife in his chest. Sammy was the one who greeted the 5 new ghosts, taught them how to possess the animatronics, and told them there was a way out. Find and kill the man who did this. Since the killer wore a security uniform beneath his costume, Sammy's plan was to kill every guard who worked the building until they found the right one. Bianca was the first to agree to do it, and once one of them crossed that line, the rest followed. They each made the same argument to themselves, that there was no other option, and Sammy, who's known nothing but murder for a decade, was the only one offering them a plan at all. Sammy is hard to categorize cleanly, and the comic seems to want it that way. He was affectionate toward the others, genuinely invested in giving them hope, but was also willing to send them out to kill strangers on the chance one of them turned out to be their killer. However, later in the story, he was present when a second group was being stalked and killed by the same man, and rather than intervening, he left them for dead. The group he left behind is our next focus. Roughly a year after Michael's group was murdered, a second group entered a remodeled version of the restaurant. They were friends Ron and Jesse, two friends, their classmate John, Paige, who was John's friend, and Lily, John's little sister, tagging along with the group. They were lured into staying past closing time because Lily lost her ukulele, and they went looking for it. Unfortunately for them, William locked the exits and hunted them through the empty building. Jesse fought back with a pocket knife and screamed at Paige to run before her mouth was cut. John's throat was cut open, and Ron died making sure Lily got out. Sadly, she didn't make it, and now they were all stuck together as ghosts, and as the number of ghosts kept growing, so did their search for a way out. As of 2026, the team is still releasing new chapters, with Chapter 16 standing as the most recent update to a story that has no announced ending. And while they thought being trapped inside a haunted machine was the worst thing that could happen to them, the ones who came next decided to weaponize the machines without caring who was still inside. Between a birthday boy crushed inside a suit, a ghost who's kept the knife that killed him lodged in his own chest for a decade, and that same ghost handing the newest arrivals a plan that turns them into killers too, this one permanently rewired my brain and earns a solid 5. On June 15, 2019, an animator working under the name @J-Gems posted a short source filmmaker video that showed a figure who sat across a monster and asked them questions. The monster in that video was Springtrap, the nickname given to the Spring Bonnie suit after the same William Afton from Case 1 died and possessed the animatronic as a ghost. The organization running the interview called itself Gems. What they wanted was for one of the animatronics to explain how a soul survives its own death, as they believed that this would be the key to eternal life. So they captured many animatronics and locked them in a facility for questioning. Yet, 14 episodes later, almost everyone who had gone looking had died somewhere along the way. The interviews. The interviews were held concurrently. However, what the interviewers were actually doing was locking themselves in a room with some of the most dangerous beings in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, and somehow expecting a conversation. And for a while, it actually worked, till Lefty changed everything. Springtrap started his interview as a confession to the serial killings without remorse. He then went on to recount how he doesn't remember what it felt like before all of this, and how it hurts to even speak. At first he seemed fine, but then something in him glitched, and he lunged at the interviewer. But it turns out the interviewer Springtrap just attacked was not human. Moments before this, interviews were going on simultaneously in the other rooms. In Golden Freddy's, who was possessed by the ghost of Cassidy, she didn't answer the interviewer's questions. Instead, she said the following.
What am I? Could I be something in your past? I'm something that you try to forget about, your nightmare. But no matter how much you do try to get rid of me, I will always find you and make you see the sins you caused. The shadows of your past will show you many ways. There will always be a place for you. Always. This is my message. Stay clear of your sins or you will suffer through all eternity.
And honestly, this sounded like an encrypted message she was sending to Springtrap instead, because as we will see it play out, it actually was. After this, she launched at the interviewer and killed him. Nightmare Bonnie was very much direct with the interviewer. He said,
You want to know how I became like this? You know, screws coming out of my fingers, wires from my ears? Why don't you go into the next room and ask Afton, or as you call him, Springtrap. He is the reason I'm like this. He is the reason we're all like this. I'm sure he's got all the answers. So why don't you take a little interrogation into the room across the corridor?
Then, in a burst of rage, he brought the interview to an end by impaling his interviewer straight through the chest with the claws thrusted into his ruined suit. Now, to the one who changed everything, Lefty, who was possessed by the ghost of Charlotte Emily. His interview was a bit calmer, but she warned the interviewer to stay out of her way. When it seemed unlikely, Lefty kills him, and in doing so, trips the facility's containment system, causing a lockdown and releasing every animatronic in the building at once. The last interview still going on at the moment was Withered Bonnie. He narrated it was Springtrap who made them the way that they were, and that all of them wanted him dead. All the animatronics wanted Springtrap found and made to answer for what he did. On the other hand, Gems also wanted his secrets to know how he created the animatronics. Neither side liked the other, but both wanted the same man, so they struck a deal to join forces and find him together. And at that very moment, the doors opened. So back to the first scene. The person who actually attacked Springtrap was revealed. It was Ennard, who was wearing the stolen skin suit of an interviewer to interrogate him. And now that they were all set free and had Springtrap in custody, they can finally have the revenge they wanted. However, having a grenade in hand, Springtrap detonated it. The others escaped with him, but Withered Bonnie was too injured to get off the ground, and he was found by the organization. The Manhunt. From here on, the series stopped being solo interrogations and started being one continuous manhunt for Springtrap. Both Withered Bonnie and Gems went after the group and Springtrap. And when they got to them, withered Bonnie from a helicopter above shot at Springtrap, but then the group crashed the chopper and the 3 soldiers in it. But the group escaped again with Springtrap. Once the animatronics broke free of gems and finally got Springtrap in a closed space, they couldn't seem to agree on what to do with him. One faction, led by Lefty, wanted him dead quickly. The other, led by Cassidy, wanted something crueler. She argued that death is too light a punishment for what he did and pushed instead to keep him alive indefinitely, in pain, for as long as it takes to feel like justice. This was the same thing she said in her interview, and she got exactly that chance. Cornering an imprisoned Springtrap in a room with no way out and no cutaway, she forced visions of his family into his head purely to watch him break. She made him see that he was responsible for the death of his whole family, his wife, his son, and his daughter. She told him,
"You are hurting, Mr. Afton. You are an open wound, and I am here to make you bleed."
The real villain. As monstrous as Afton is, the story doesn't actually end up positioning him as its villain. That role belongs to the Major, the head of Gems. He was the one person obsessed enough with the key to eternal life to be willing to burn through anyone who dared stand in his way. A soldier named Cody Kenneth, watching the Major's obsession with weaponizing Springtrap's remnant technology spiral further out of control, tried appealing to whatever's left of his humanity and told him it isn't too late to stop before he starts destroying lives the same way Springtrap did. The Major's response to him was to execute him on the spot. Later in this series, when a defector named Goodbloke tells the same Major that a shredded, half-destroyed, withered Bonnie is more human than him, he didn't even bother arguing. He just stuck a knife into his belly and left him to die. There was no limit to what he was ready to do to attain immortal power. And speaking of Springtrap not being the real villain, amidst everything he did, he was still a father who just wanted his daughter back, the translator. The Major's actual endgame was revealed in Afton's own basement. In the years after his daughter, Elizabeth, died, Afton didn't grieve the way anyone else would have. Instead, he ran a private, sanctioned series of trials underneath his own house, trying to force what was left of her soul back into a body. That failed process is the same one that eventually produced Ennard. The Major wanted to weaponize that same technology called the Translator, which is a device that converts remnant into raw electrical current and pulls it straight out of a living animatronic. In this lore, remnant is the residual, soul-like essence left behind by someone who died in extreme fear or trauma, which can bond to objects like animatronic suits and give them a kind of consciousness. The Major's plan was to force Springtrap to build it. His leverage is the one thing Springtrap had never stopped chasing, what was left of his daughter. The condition given was build it and he can have her back. Springtrap built it, but when the converter was finished, there was one more requirement nobody mentioned up front. It needs blood, straight from the source, raw and unprocessed. The device isn't just mechanical, it runs on a living body. Springtrap escapes with the Translator before the Major can use him for it, admitting along the way that he built more than one for every mascot. This means that every single animatronic has it, so in the chaos, the Major manages to capture Blue Bonnie and drains the remnant straight out of him to complete his own suit, the Ethereal. When Bonnie's remnant was drained, she woke up in something called the Ethereal, guided by a presence who calls itself Nightmare. This Nightmare appeared to be a future, corrupted version of Cassidy, warning Bonnie about what the present Cassidy is on the verge of becoming. She said, "You must stop her. You must stop me." When Springtrap fled the Major, he went to an old Fazbear service shop and plugged the Translator into a terminal at Afton Robotics, with the hope to see his daughter again. The computer voice specimen detected over and over until his daughter appeared in front of him, and he started saying,
"I'm sorry for everything. I was an idiot, but I know how to fix this. I know how to fix you. Just take my hand."
She was getting close enough to reach him when suddenly Cassidy zapped her away. This turned out to be another stage of the same punishment of getting close enough to redemption with his daughter and having neither, the spring lock. Outside the service shop, the other animatronics had arrived, and so did the Major, all going after Springlock. Now, here's the final twist. Springtrap has been trapped inside the Springlock suit for years, but the fact that he is still and probably a father produced the series' most visceral image. When he threatened to take what's left of Elizabeth's remnant, Afton pulled an iron out of himself and jammed it into a gap in the Major's suit. What follows is a Springlock failure that should have killed him outright. Afton is eventually subdued and led back toward Lefty, but that's not even close to the end, because suddenly, as the Major was dying from the Springlock, the Nightmare said,
"I propose a deal that you will not decline."
Aftermath. 7 years on, the interviewed still remains unfinished. The last video he posted was in August of 2025. At the moment, Bonnie is still out there somewhere in the Ethereal. Does she come back at all? And if she does, how does anyone stop Cassidy, who's already proven she can reach inside someone's skull and make them relive their worst day for as long as she wants? Afton is still breathing for now. Is this finally where that changes? And the deal on the table, how does it all end up? Between Cassidy forcing a dying man to relive the deaths of his entire family just to watch him break, a device that needs raw human blood because souls alone apparently aren't fuel enough, and a father getting close enough to actually touch his daughter's hand before she's ripped away from him a second time. The author owes me therapy for this one, and it lands at level 4. Bonnie's Burrow is an FNAF alternate universe webcomic created by Fritz Drawstuff and am_do_art, who also goes by someone on the internet. Since we'll be covering more of am_do_art's works, we'll be calling her Art for the rest of the video. Bonnie's Burrow was launched in December 2023, and unlike the original franchise, it focused on the missing children and their families, specifically how life was for them before it all started. And the first volume puts the Freddy Fazbear founders' families, the Aftons and Emilys, right at the center. The first chapter, titled Start of Something New, was released on June 27, 2024, and it was set on February 3, 1983, and we're introduced to the Fredbear's family diner, where Fritz Reed and his younger brother Jeremy were hanging out and watching Fredbear and Spring Bonnie animatronics perform. However, by the third chapter, which was set on March 18, 1983, the story shifted focus away from them as Art retold how things started for the Afton and the Emily family. William and his friend Henry Emily both owned and ran the Fredbear family diner, with William managing the business while Henry built and maintained the animatronics. But from the moment we were introduced to them, things were not going as they should. Henry had made plans to surprise his twins, Charlie and Sammy, on their birthday at the restaurant, but William didn't approve of this. He disliked the fact that Henry had decided without first informing him, telling him only after it was all said and done. This was a small argument, but seeing how their friendship began to crumble reminded readers how William's eventual hatred for Henry led to Charlie's death. While they were still talking, Henry left him to go pick up the twins from school. He smiled as he walked, unaware of William's state of unhappiness. William was angry, muttering complaints about Henry and his kids. When he got to his office, he was frustrated. Elizabeth, his daughter, noticed it and asked what was wrong, but he dismissed her, something he would regret once one of their creations takes Elizabeth away from him. In the fourth chapter, titled She's Gonna Win, we were introduced to the Emily twins, Sammy and Charlie. In the original storyline, Charlie, also known as Charlotte, was William's first victim, and in Bonnie's Burrow, we see her life before the tragic moment. She loved her brother, but she also loved to tease him. On that particular day, Charlie and Sammy were at home preparing for a football competition, where they would join Gabe and his best friend Posey. Gabe is also canon in the original storyline, and he's one of the missing children, but Bonnie's Burrow was pitting Gabe and Charlie against each other. Even before the competition started, Charlie could already imagine how the ranking would be, with herself in the lead, Sammy second, and Gabe and Posey trailing behind. Once they arrived at school, tension started simmering between Charlie and Gabe. Gabe made it clear that he wanted to see Charlie fail, but she told him that nothing he could do would make him better than her. Though they played for the same team, they were competing for the top spot in the ranking. With this tension, they went into the game and began to play, wherein Charlie scored the winning goal with an assist from Gabe. The players were then invited to Fredbear's family diner the next day to celebrate the twins' birthday. However, Gabe decided that he and his friends would attend the party and, in his words,
Make it the worst that it could be.
by the next chapter, titled Happy Birthday You Two, the twins were excited for their upcoming party. However, not everyone was happy with them. William, who was already disgruntled with Henry, and Gabe, who was still seething from Charlie's insults the previous day, were both going to be there. At the party, Henry handed over the presents for his children. Sammy got a Foxy the Pirate animatronic, while Charlie got the Marionette, or as she's also known in the fandom, the puppet. And straight from the box, the Marionette's smile remained fixed, but it became increasingly menacing. Then, her head tilted as her sparkling green eyes widened. She then began to scan the room, but her main focus was Charlie, whom she marked by the color of the green bracelet that she had on her wrist. The episode ended abruptly on this panel, with a promise for future episodes. Now, one has to wonder, will this AU dare to follow the original storyline by having Charlie meet her tragic end at her own birthday party? And then Gabe, what role would he play in this story before he meets his own tragic fate? Right under the final panel, Art commented,
Charlie's hours are numbered.
and this could mean that Charlie's life would end on her birthday. The last panel was published on July 15, 2026. Fans of Bonnie's Burrow are eagerly waiting for the next publication, with the twins' birthday party well underway and the conflicts already brewing. It's safe to say that this AU is slightly cursed and sits at level 1. In this AU, Bonnie's Burrow tells us the brewing tension that might spark the series of tragedies within the FNAF world. The next story shifts focus to everyday lives of these victims, making what happened to them even more tragic. The Incidents is an FNAF alternate universe that was also created by Art, and this one was a retelling of the FNAF story but within her own alternate universe, or AU, called Robophobia, where the Afton siblings had close relationships with the Emily siblings. Incident 1, titled The Death of Charlotte Emily, was first published on March 10, 2025. In the canon, Charlie was the first of William's victims, and her passing kicked off the chain of events that the games, books, and movies told. With this, Art gave us a fresh take on Charlie's death and also made significant changes to her character. The story began 5 days before Garrett Afton's birthday. Garrett, in this Robophobia AU, was William's youngest child. Art lifted the name from the 2023 Five Nights at Freddy film, where the protagonist Mike Schmidt had a younger brother named Garrett, who was another of William's victims. But in the incidents, Art made him William's son. Set on October 5th, 1983, Charlie and Sammy Emily were both 10 years old and excited about the party that would be held at Fredbear's family diner. On their calendar, they had marked the days down to October 10th, when the party was to happen. Unlike in Bonnie's Burrow, Charlie was acting like the big sister, and she was really protective of Sammy, who was timid and seemed to hang on her every word. In one quiet moment, Sammy admitted that he hated Fredbear's because it was too noisy, but Charlie promised to protect him no matter what. The next day, 4 days before the party, we were introduced to Missy Emily, the mother of the twins and Henry's wife. In the original storyline, Henry's wife didn't get a first name. She was known simply as Mrs. Emily, and in the novel Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, she and Henry separated after Charlie's death. Her moving away with their surviving son Sammy was likely what saved him from getting involved in the FNAF tragedy. And in Incident 1, the twins were shown to have a deep connection with her and even fell asleep in her arms while watching a movie together, showing how the loss of her children would really affect Missy. On October 7, 1983, with only 3 days before Garrett's birthday, Henry took Charlie shopping for gifts that she would give to Garrett. It seemed like a harmless father-daughter bonding time as they raced down the road to Fredbear's. However, when they got there, Charlie was in for a surprise. Henry didn't want her shopping on the main floor of the diner where everyone else shopped. He told her that they had some extra merchandise in the back because he didn't want to spend more money than he should. They weren't supposed to get merchandise from there, so Henry made his daughter promise to keep it a secret, especially from William, to which she smiled and said,
"Don't worry, Dad, your secret will die with me."
This statement was especially tragic considering what was going to happen to her in the coming days. There was a brief moment where they quietly stared at each other, as if weighing the gravity of what she said. Then they both began to laugh, finding it funny at the moment. One thing that had consistently been shown was that Charlie was the center of her family. Sammy loved and depended on her, and her parents favored and doted on her as well. Death wouldn't just take Charlie, it would hollow out everyone she left behind. The comic ended abruptly on this panel, with only 18 pages published since its launch in March 2025. The last page was published on July 12, 2026. Art has yet to release a new update, and as it stands, there is no telling when the next page will be published. So in this story, we explore Charlie's life while knowing of her impending death and the effect it would have on everyone around her. Like, I need a minute to fully process this, so I'll be giving it a level 2. While this AU focused on Charlie and her family, the next story changed an already beloved fan story while adding more victims to the tragedy. On June 27, 2024, Art and her team launched a FNAF comic dubbed Children Reimagined, a new interpretation of an old comic simply called Children. It also takes some inspiration from Children Rekindled by Bonfim, which we covered earlier in this video. Reimagined, according to its creator, sought to bring back the older version, but expanded to cover the first 6 FNAF games instead of just the first 4 like Children Rekindled. The story kicked off at 5:42 p.m. on June 26, 1986. Much like in Rekindled, it began with Michael Gould and his 4 friends, Daniel, Bianca, Francis, and Charlie, being dropped off at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza by Michael's mom, simply referred to as Mrs. Gould, to celebrate his birthday. Before leaving, Michael's mom reminded him to get everyone home before it got too dark, to which he enthusiastically agreed. Once Mrs. Gould left, Bianca asked Michael what he wanted to do, and he suggested that they try out the new arcade at the restaurant, even joking that,
"I just know Dan already has some high scores to beat."
Excited, Daniel challenged everyone to a race to the arcade, which he won after pushing Bianca as she was about to get there. As Charlie checked in on Bianca, Daniel was distracted by how cool the arcade was and how many games there were. Bianca then challenged him to see who could get the most high scores first, and he agreed. Meanwhile, right outside the arcade, a Spring Bonnie animatronic stood at the entrance, watching the children who were blissfully unaware of what he had in store for them. Back in the arcade, Charlie and Michael tried to convince Francis to play a game, but he seemed completely uninterested. Michael claimed they had everything in the restaurant, cool animatronics, pizza, and the arcade, but Francis shut him down, sarcastically saying,
"3 things isn't everything."
Charlie then mentioned that Francis liked Foxy, and he agreed while trying to sound cool. The kids kept on having fun in the arcade, playing games and celebrating Michael's birthday. They were so immersed that they didn't notice the time pass, and soon it was nearly 7 p.m. Michael had forgotten his mom's instructions to get everyone home before dark, and he and his friends had no idea that this mistake would cost them everything. As of the making of this video in July 2026, that's where the story ends. The comic has been on hiatus since April 12, 2026, and neither Art nor the members of the team have dropped any information so far on any social media accounts. However, Art, who was a huge fan of the earlier reboot, advised readers to read the Children Rekindled comic before reading Reimagined. With this information, it is possible for the readers to deduce how the story will likely progress. The wiki fan page for Children Reimagined also includes Sammy White, who in Rekindled was introduced as William's first victim. However, there were also characters who were not mentioned in Rekindled named Connor and Chloe, a set of twins who met a similar fate as Sammy. This hinted that Reimagined might go in a different direction from Rekindled. Profiles of the Afton family were also in the wiki fan page, so they will likely make appearances in Reimagined as well, along with more characters who will eventually be revealed over time. Right now, Children Reimagined is basically just a wholesome birthday party at an arcade, aside from that brief lingering shot of Golden Freddy watching from the entrance. Nothing bad has actually happened yet. The story would probably get even scarier from there, but it's just slightly cursed from the background tension for now, landing it at a very mild level 1. So far, we have covered stories that centered on the children who unknowingly walked into something they couldn't have predicted, but that's not the only side of this story worth telling. Our last story takes a step back and shifts the perspective to another set of characters central to the FNAF universe, the animatronics. So sometime in 2025, Reddit user Ephesus777 published a 2-part comic titled The Location on the Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit, putting their own spin on the original franchise. The horror comedy comic gave a glimpse into the lives of the animatronics built by M. Afton, their mysterious creator whose identity isn't clear in this comic. Since we cannot confirm if this is their version of William or another member of the Afton family, let's just call this character M. The story was told from the perspective of a human animatronic bunny named Bonnet, an animatronic designed to mimic human behavior. She was one of 2 bunny assistants to Freddy Fazbear, who dreamed of becoming the superstar of the ring, which was the main attraction in the brand new Circus Baby's Pizza World. The story began in the basement of Circus Baby's Pizza World, somewhere in Utah, where Bonnet was thinking about starting to work soon. Her twin and co-assistant Bonnie told her not to meet with Freddy because he's a mad bear. She then thought about all the other main animatronics, Ballora the ballet dancer, Foxy the fox showman, and finally Circus Baby, who was the ringleader. She saw them as a hassle, saying that she would rather not have her job than work with them, but decided that since she was there, she would chase her dream and be loved by everyone. The problem, however, was that the other main animatronics were so much tougher than she was, so she devised a plan to intimidate them all, starting with the blue lady, Ballora. On getting to Ballora's room, she was immediately overwhelmed by Ballora's beauty and stumbled over herself during her introduction. She told Ballora that she wanted them to get to know each other better, but Ballora, completely clueless, kept asking why. Bonnet eventually gave an excuse, saying, "We'll be more synchronized for our group performances." Ballora then asked if it meant leaving her stage, which would mean going against her program installed by M, and Bonnet replied yes. Ballora was skeptical about it, but eventually agreed, and together they went to the next animatronic, Foxy. When they got to Foxy's room, they tried to call them out, but were met with radio silence. Just as they were about to give up, Ballora spotted Foxy peeking through the curtains. Bonnet freaked out, thinking Foxy wanted to attack her, but the mute Foxy wrote a message on a signboard for them, telling them to return to their position since the show wasn't on. Bonnet and Ballora tried to convince them to tag along, even offering snacks and tea, but they adamantly refused. Eventually, Ballora and Bonnet gave up and started to leave. Only then did Foxy give in and join them. Bonnet asked them why they couldn't speak, and they replied that they didn't know which voice to use, since their program didn't pick one. With Bonnet's encouragement, they picked a voice and spoke with the others. As they were leaving, Ballora asked about Bonnie and Freddy, to which Foxy replied that they were in the nearby parts and services room. Bonnet shut down any idea of going since Bonnie said they shouldn't be disturbed, recalling the last time she met Bonnie. Back then, he was covered in hemocyanin, which was the equivalent of blood for the animatronics. Bonnet rushed to check on Bonnie, but he clarified that the blood on him wasn't his before pulling out a giant claw he hid behind his back, which terrified Bonnet. Bonnie explained it was Freddy's hand, which he got from teaching him good manners. He then talked about how he took off Freddy's arms and legs when they first met, and how he took only one arm now because they couldn't get too damaged so close to their show. Bonnie recounted all these with a wide grin on his face. He ended by reassuring Bonnet, who was frozen with fear, that they wouldn't get dismantled, and he just needed one more time to convince Freddy to become happily friendly with Bonnet. After recalling this day, Bonnet snapped back to the present with a cold shiver down her spine, and the three made their way down to the room of the ringleader, Circus Baby. While they were waiting for Circus Baby, Bonnet thought to herself that she had amassed a team strong enough to intimidate Circus Baby and get closer to becoming the main attraction, but her imagination was crushed the moment Circus Baby made her grand entrance. To Bonnet, she was practically made to be the ringleader, which nearly discouraged her, but she picked herself back up. Foxy questioned Circus Baby for making a mess with the balloons and the confetti, but she retorted that it was necessary to welcome those that she'd be working with. Bonnet stated that they were hoping to have tea, and Circus Baby ushered them to a table already set up for them, which took Bonnet by surprise. It turned out that little bots called Biddy Babs followed their every move. Worse still, she was the only one who didn't notice. Ballora explained that all animatronics had a built-in radar that could detect other bots nearby, and Bonnet might have technical issues since she didn't notice the Biddy Babs. However, Foxy reassured her that M or a technician could probably fix it. As Foxy was telling off Circus Baby for sending a Biddy Bab to their auditorium, Bonnet panicked since there was no tea in the cups. Circus Baby explained that the only tea belonged to M and it was in his office, but she reassured her that the cakes, which the night guard had left the night before, were real. She also warned everyone not to eat too much so it wouldn't be uncomfortable to throw up later. However, Bonnet was already wolfing down the cakes, so Foxy figured that the technician could just empty her artificial pouch later. This confused Bonnet because she thought she could just digest them. To her surprise, Foxy explained that none of the animatronics were equipped with digestive systems. Circus Baby added that they were only similar to humans in appearance and behavior before changing the conversation to their creator, M. When Circus Baby asked the others about their thoughts on their creator, Bonnet was surprised to discover that he had visited them all, but not her. She told herself that he was probably saving the best for last and making sure her poster looked perfect, despite the posters already being out. Circus Baby then turned to Foxy to ask for their opinion. In Foxy's mind, they remembered a portrait they once saw and thought to himself,
Isn't he like a parent to us?
Foxy got snapped out of their thoughts by Circus Baby, who then asked him what his gender was. The three female bots entered a debate on it, with Circus Baby and Ballora stating that they were a girl, while Bonnet argued that they were a boy. This got Foxy amused, even egging them on when they stopped. When the ladies then asked Foxy, they just said the others can refer to them however they want. Ballora and Bonnet tried to get the answer out of Foxy, which made them curious as to why the ladies wanted to know. Bonnet replied that it was because they were friends, but Foxy seemed to think otherwise. This set Bonnet off, and she yelled at them for not seeing her as a friend, calling it
Typical boy behavior.
The whole ordeal made Circus Baby laugh and comment that they were much like a family. Foxy called the title unnecessary for machines and remarked that they were more like co-workers. Ballora called their perspective boring, and the two got into an argument. Bonnet tried to calm them down, telling Foxy that it was fine if they felt that way, though they may change their opinion later. Circus Baby, however, disagreed, saying,
What you think or say isn't important, and adding that love was all that mattered.
which left everyone else confused. In her words,
After all, we were all created for the same purpose. We will fulfill our mission and stay together forever, just like how M. Afton planned for us. We have been made out of love and will write our destiny. Together, we will reunite as many people as possible, and only then will we be able to exist and be complete.
and the comic ends on that eerie note. So far, there have been no new updates, so it is unclear whether the comic is on hiatus or discontinued. The creator Ephesus has been inactive on all relevant social media platforms, with their Reddit page hidden from the public eye. There are quite a few unanswered questions, the major one being the identity of M. Afton. It could be William's son Michael, but as the story was not made to follow the canonical framework, one can only speculate on the true identity of this creator. For the most part, the location plays out like a cozy slice-of-life comedy, which is exactly why the horror hits so hard. The scary panels just pop out of nowhere as the story flows, like that visual jump scare of Bonnie grinning while covered in blood, or those panels where Foxy looks absolutely terrifying, only for you to realize that they were literally just daydreaming or being themselves. It completely throws you off the comedy, like a reminder that the story is a horror comic. And Circus Baby's weirdly cult-like ending speech to that visual whiplash, and yeah, I need a minute to regain my composure, landing the location at a solid level 2.